encompasses taxation, both direct and indirect, Prevention of Money Laundering Act, PMLA, Benami transactions, corporate laws including Companies Act, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which we know as IBC, SURFACE Act, and other statutory litigations and legal services. Our firm is headquartered in Surat with branch offices strategically located in Mumbai, Delhi, Pune, Ahmedabad, Nasik, Vadodara, Faridabad, Gurgaon, and Rajkot. In addition, we maintain a robust network associates spread across India, enabling us to provide seamless legal services and comprehensive support to clients nationwide. We also have a unique network associate policy, and in case any of you are interested to know more or further details about that to explore partnership opportunities, please feel free to contact any of our partners directly. So with that, I think we are through with the introduction part, and I hand over the guys to Shefali ji to go through the cross charge and related provisions. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Pramodji. So first of all, I would like to give some background about this topic because many times this is a question whether it is mandatory or not, and why it is in existence for the for the first question. So cross charge is required due to the unique structure of GST because when it comes to a distinct person, so what they have done, they have broken a person into the different person, right? So GST law, its structure is like that. It's a centralized act, but you will have to take registration in each and every state. So for an entity, which is a single entity for maybe other laws like Income Tax Act or the Companies Act, for the GST perspective, it is divided into multiple states. So even for the central tax, because at the inception of GST, this was a question whether a person is required to take registration of central tax only once, and for the different state there will be the different registrations. But no, for each and every particular state there is a separate registration for both center and state. So it's a kind of a bucket where center state is state wise. So even a central tax, even a state tax, but still it is state wise, right? So now the question is from where the question of cross charging is arising, because for the purpose of other acts I am single person, but for the purpose of GST I am different people, I am a distinct person. So मेरा राजस्थान का ब्रांच एक अलग इंसान है, हरियाणा is a different person, Mumbai is a different person. Now I am doing something, some specific task for any of my distinct person, right? But because that is my distinct person, I am not charging anything. That's very natural to happen. तो मैं कर रही हूँ काम राजस्थान के लिए, हरियाणा के लिए, बट मैं कोई चार्ज नहीं कर रही. तो नाउ देयर इज अ क्वेश्चन कि बिकॉज इट्स माय रिलेटेड पर्सन तो मैं नहीं कर रही, मेरा डिस्टिंक्ट पर्सन, आई एम नॉट चार्जिंग. बट अगर सेम टास्क सेम वर्क मैंने किसी थर्ड पर्सन के लिए किया होता, तो क्या मैंने वहां पे चार्ज नहीं किया होता? वहां पे मैंने डेफिनेटली चार्ज किया होता. बट देन सप्लाई सेज कि इट शुड बी फॉर कंसिडरेशन. तो अगर कंसिडरेशन ही नहीं है तो मैं नहीं चार्ज कर रही, आपको क्या प्रॉब्लम है? द प्रॉब्लम इज आई एम नॉट चार्जिंग बिकॉज इट्स माई डिस्टिंक्ट पर्सन. And in some of the cases I may try to manipulate it. It's very easy for me to manipulate. I would just like to give an example. मतलब कुछ मैनिपुलेशन है जो अभी भी सारे all of the changes of the provision अभी भी possible हो सकती है. I will not call it manipulation because when something is under the provisions of law, it's not actually manipulation. We can better say tax planning. But for example, I have a particular branch in a particular state. Let us take an example, a company like Bajus. मान लीजिए सेंट्रलाइज मेरी कंपनी वर्क करती है. अभी एक स्टेट में जब मैं कहीं नई ब्रांच ओपन करती हूँ, किसी नई सिटी में कहीं नई ब्रांच ओपन करती हूँ, तो हमेशा हमारा इनिशियली वी हैव टू स्पेंड अ लॉट ऑन केपेक्स. तो बहुत सारा इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट है जो आ रहा है और एक्यूमुलेट हो रहा है, बट उसका कुछ हो नहीं रहा है क्योंकि एक ब्रांच को ऑपरेट करने में इट विल टेक सम टाइम, इट विल टेक टाइम टू पिक अप, एंड इन द इनिशियल पीरियड द सेल्स विल बी वेरी लेस. तो मेरा मान लीजिए 2 करोड़ का खर्चा हो गया और 2 करोड़ में कुछ तो नॉन जीएसटी था एंड जीएसटी का मिला के लेट सपोज मेरा कुछ भी 15-20 लाख 25 लाख कुछ भी मेरा एक इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट खड़ा हो गया. नाउ उसमें क्या हो रहा है कि ब्रांच को भी पिकअप करने में, ऑपरेशन स्टार्ट करने में कुछ टाइम लगा, लेट्स से 6 मंथ और मे बी 1 ईयर, एंड देन उसको टर्नओवर पिकअप करने में टाइम लगा. तो टर्नओवर उसका भी है बट से 10 लाख है, 20 लाख है, 30 लाख है, 1 लाख पर मंथ, इस तरीके से बहुत कम टर्नओवर है. नाउ ऑन द अदर हैंड आई मे बी हैविंग अ डिफरेंट ब्रांच इन द डिफरेंट स्टेट व्हिच इज अ फुल फ्लैश ब्रांच which is already operating for many years and which is doing a full capacity of sales, right? तो वहां पे मेरे को प्रॉब्लम क्या है कि फुल कैपेसिटी ऑफ सेल्स पे काम करने का मतलब ये है कि मेरा बहुत सारा वहां पे जो सेल्स है उसमें मैं कैश के थ्रू टैक्स पे कर रही हूँ, बिकॉज मेरे अच्छे मार्जिन है। तो काफी सारी इंडस्ट्रीज ऐसी होती है स्पेशली सर्विस सेक्टर में जहाँ पे योर मार्जिन आर गुड, ठीक है। तो वहां पे मेरा क्या हो रहा है कि मैं 20 लाख 30 लाख हर महीना टैक्स पे कर रही हूँ बाय द कैश लेजर। बट इन अ वन पर्टिकुलर ब्रांच व्हाट इज हैपनिंग, पूरा इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट पड़ा हुआ है, उसको कोई यूटिलाइजेशन ही नहीं हो रहा है। यूटिलाइजेशन इसलिए नहीं हो पा रहा है मेरा, क्यों? क्योंकि मेरा उतना भी सेल्स ही नहीं है। सो एज ए कॉर्पोरेट मेरे को क्या लगेगा, देखो हमेशा टैक्स पे ना करना ही एक प्लानिंग नहीं होता है। Somehow to pay it through the input tax credit or to delay it, that can also be a good part of planning, because in our country working capital is a big issue. फाइनेंसिंग बहुत अच्छी कोई अवेलेबिलिटी है नहीं सोर्सेज की। वर्किंग कैपिटल सबसे बड़ा इशू रहता है आजकल, स्पेशली मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर में जहाँ पे बहुत ही कैपिटल इंटेंसिव इंडस्ट्रीज हैं। तो अभी मैंने क्या किया, मैंने क्या किया, ठीक है अभी नई ब्रांच ओपन करेंगे, तो मैंने आगे से अपनी प्लानिंग ही चेंज कर दी कि वी विल स्टार्ट ओपनिंग ए न्यू ब्रांच। और उसके लिए जो प्रोक्यूरमेंट्स होंगे, वो प्रोक्यूरमेंट्स में क्या करूंगी, जो मेरी फुल फ्लैश ब्रांच चल रही है मैं उसके थ्रू लेना शुरू कर देती हूँ। तो वहां पे मेरा इनपुट टैक्स रेट यूटिलाइज होता रहेगा और यहाँ पे मेरा कोई अभी ब्लॉकेज यहाँ पे क्रिएट नहीं होगा। अच्छा, अब एक और क्वेश्चन राइज होता है कि जो हमारी नॉर्मल इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट की स्कीम है, क्या उसमें ऐसा कोई ब्लॉकेज है कि आपने उसके लिए प्रोक्यूर कर लिया तो आपको इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट नहीं मिलेगा? या इवन फॉर सर्विसेज के लिए भी ऐसा कुछ है कि आपने दूसरी ब्रांच के लिए प्रोक्यूर किया तो रिसीव तो उसने की, बट द थिंग इज द डेफिनेशन ऑफ रिसिपिएंट is itself not saying that the actual recipient is the recipient. It is saying the person who is liable to make the payment of consideration is the recipient. ठीक है, तो recipient तो हो ही सकता है। Then if you will see in the provisions of input tax credit also, earlier they are provided for the provisions of constructive delivery of goods, but there was no provision for constructive delivery of services. But वो भी obviously implied तो था ही, वो भी उन्होंने फिर करेक्ट किया, तो कंस्ट्रक्टिव डिलीवरी भी हो सकती है सर्विसेज की। तो ऐसा कहीं कंडीशन ही नहीं है कि मैंने उसको प्रोक्यूर किया तो मेरे को ही पर्सनली उसको रिसीव करना है, तो अदर पार्टी कैन आल्सो रिसीव इट। सो देयर इज नो व्हाइल टेकिंग इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट। सो लाइक टाइम एंड अगेन गवर्नमेंट थिंक कि यार ये कहीं इस तरीके से टैक्स प्लानिंग करना रहे, एंड आई विल अगेन से कि जो भी प्रोविजंस उन्होंने बनाए हैं वो उसके बाद भी सकता है। मे बी कहीं पे कुछ केसेस में कुछ सिनेरियोज में रिस्ट्रिक्शन आएगी, बट इफ समबडी इज गुड एट फाइनेंस एंड स्ट्रक्चरिंग कॉर्पोरेट स्ट्रक्चरिंग, दे कैन स्टिल प्लान समथिंग। सो उन्होंने फिर क्रॉस चार्ज को इनकॉर्पोरेट करने की कोशिश की। सो तो डिजाइन किया फिर जीएसटी के प्रोविजन को उस तरीके से ही डिजाइन किया कि भाई आप अगर अपनी डिस्टिंक्ट पर्सन को कुछ सर्विसेज दे रहे हैं, देन यू विल हैव टू क्रॉस चार्ज। कैसे? क्योंकि वो कह रहे हैं कि इवन विदाउट कंसिडरेशन, बिकॉज दे नो वी विल नॉट चार्ज एनी कंसिडरेशन, राइट? सो दे क्रिएटेड एन एक्सेप्शन दैट इवन इफ देयर इज नो कंसिडरेशन इट विल बी डीम्ड एज अ सप्लाई, तो सप्लाई आपको मानना पड़ेगा। तो जस्ट टू गो थ्रू द प्रोविजंस, वैसे मोस्ट ऑफ द पीपल हैव ऑलरेडी गॉन थ्रू इट, मैं सिर्फ एक आपको फास्ट वॉक थ्रू उस पे कराऊंगी कि व्हाट इज द स्ट्रक्चर दे हैव प्रिपेयर्ड। सो द डेफिनेशन ऑफ सप्लाई, basic principle we all know. First of all, it should be in the course or furtherance of business. The second thing is there should be a consideration, but then they understood in the case of distinct person you will not be charging any consideration, so they added first exception, that is schedule 1, and in schedule 1 they have entered an entry. There they said entry number 2, supply of goods or services or both between related person or the distinct persons as specified under section 25, 25, 4 and 5, two subsections of section 25 talks about the distinct person. The distinct person are the people under same pen, the other establishments, they may be registered, they may not be registered, right? But if they are under the same pen, they are operating under the same pen, they are my distinct person. मतलब एक ही घर में पैदा हुए हैं, अलग अलग जगह पे रहते हैं, कोई बात नहीं, but the pen is one, राइट? डीएनए सबके अंदर वो एक ही चल रहा है। सो व्हेन मेड इन द कोर्स ऑफ फर्दरेंस ऑफ बिजनेस, बट इन द कोर्स ऑफ फर्दरेंस ऑफ बिजनेस होना यहाँ पे भी जरूरी है। सो दे ट्राई टू स्ट्रक्चर इट इन सच अ वे दैट इफ यू आर डिस्टिंक्ट पर्सन ऑफ समवन यू विल हैव टू चार्ज फॉर द सप्लाईज यू आर मेकिंग फॉर द अदर पीपल। अच्छा, देन यहाँ पे वैल्यूएशन की बात आई। अब मैंने कहा ना आपको कि दे हैव ट्राइड टू क्रिएट द प्रोविजंस बट स्टिल देयर आर चांसेस ऑफ टैक्स प्लानिंग। दे सेड कि जहां पे आपका इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट यूटिलाइज कर सकते हैं योर रिसीविंग ब्रांच, तो वहां पे वो कह रहे हैं कि आप इनवॉइस वैल्यू कुछ भी रखो, मुझे उस चीज से कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है। तो जो मैंने आपको एग्जांपल दिया उसमें अगर आप देखोगे तो आप इनवॉइस वैल्यू 0 कर दो। इसमें देयर वाज आल्सो अ सर्कुलर, देयर वाज सर्कुलर नंबर 199, सो दे फर्दर क्लैरिफाइड द सिचुएशन क्योंकि इस रूल के बाद भी कुछ उसके अंदर एनोमलीज थे, तो वर्ड टू वर्ड आई विल नॉट बी वॉकिंग थ्रू वर्ड टू वर्ड. सो बट यहाँ पे उन्होंने जो है एक प्रोविजो ऐड किया. जनरली तो दे सेड मार्केट वैल्यू प्लस 10%, सॉरी मार्केट वैल्यू मतलब कॉस्टिंग प्लस 10% और मार्केट वैल्यू का 90% वट. बट यहाँ पे उन्होंने प्रोविजोस में ऐड कर रखा है, मतलब वी डोंट नीड टू रीड द एंटायर रूल फॉर दैट पर्पस. दे हैव जस्ट सेड कि आपने अगर अपनी ऐसी ब्रांच को, डिस्टिंक्ट पर्सन को, ऐसे पर्सन को कर रहे हो हु इज एलिजिबल फॉर द इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट, सो जैसे कि ठीक है आप फिर जो भी इनवॉइस पे इनवॉइसिंग करोगे मेरे हिसाब से वो ठीक है, मतलब वी आर ओके विद दैट प्राइसिंग, बिकॉज देयर थॉट प्रोसेस शुड बी दैट if you're invoicing to a receiving party who is also eligible for the input tax credit, then what will happen? भाई मैंने आपको 1 करोड़ का इनवॉइस करूं, चाहे मैं आपको 1 लाख का इनवॉइस करूं, और मैं आपको चाहे 18 लाख का टैक्स चार्ज करूं, चाहे 1 लाख 80 हजार का करूं, सो अल्टीमेटली यू विल बी एलिजिबल फॉर टू क्लेम द इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट. सो वही चीज जो यहाँ पे एब्जॉर्ब हो रही थी वो वहां पे जाके एब्जॉर्ब हो जाएगी, तो बहुत ज्यादा कोई लगा एक्सचेकर को इससे फर्क नहीं पड़ेगा. बट इफ यू विल सी, जो मैंने आपको एग्जांपल दिया, एक्चुअली इससे फर्क पड़ सकता है कि मेरी रिसीविंग ब्रांच में इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट ले तो सकती है वो 100%, बट उसकी सेल्स नहीं हो रही तो इसलिए वो नहीं ले पा रही है. सो उस केस में ये प्लान हम लोग कर सकते हैं. तो ये इसके रूल्स थे. देन 199 उनका एक सर्कुलर था. अच्छा, इसके बाद भी कुछ इश्यूज इसके अंदर थे. 199 मैंने यहाँ पे स्लाइड्स में कवर नहीं किया है, सो आई विल बी जस्ट टेलिंग यू कि 199 के अंदर इसमें कुछ इश्यूज ये थे कि अल्टीमेटली अगर मैंने इनवॉइस इशू किया ही नहीं, so if there is no invoicing at all, so the rule is like you are raising the invoice, so whatever value you are raising an invoice is fine with us. But if I have not raised an invoice, तो ये तो breach हो गया, GST होगा. So they also clarified कि अपने नहीं भी invoice raise किया है, so we will assume कि nil value का invoicing हो गया है, and it's fine with us. Then there was another question that if the receiving party is not 100% eligible for the input tax credit, then what will happen? Whether we are required to, add the salaries cost also. So in that circular they said कि नहीं, सैलरी आपको उसमें ऐड करने का जरूरत नहीं है. आई विल फील इट्स एन इनकम्प्लीट प्रोविजन. मतलब वो कहने का है, नहीं कहने का उनका नहीं था, जो आपने रूल में ऑलरेडी दे ही रखा था कि आपको कैसा उसको चार्ज करना है. सो आई मीन उसका वहां पे कोई रिक्वायरमेंट नहीं थी. सो ये हमारा भी क्रॉस चार्ज का है. देन इस पे थे कुछ advanced ruling. Now many people feel that cross charge is still not mandatory, and even if we go through all of the provisions, it's actually not mandatory because invoice नहीं raise कर रहे हैं हम लोग, तो भी तो मेरा वो assume कर ही रहे हैं, तो mandatory तो वो अभी भी नहीं है. So when we should be using it, when we should not be going utilizing the cross charge, that's a different thing. तो mandatory होना नहीं होना एक अलग चीज है, but कई बार mandatory नहीं है तो भी we should be actually doing it. So इस पे there are some advanced rulings. बहुत ही इनिशियल पीरियड की एशिया कोलंबिया हॉस्पिटल, ऑल ऑफ यू शुड हैव ऑलरेडी गॉन थ्रू इट, so I will not be walking through in too much detail into it. Then there was another advanced ruling, Cummins, which was very vastly discussed. So it was also about the cross charge thing. So in advanced ruling, generally the courts have said that you will have to cross charge in most of the cases, right? So I've just done through the slides. Now let's come back. So now the most important thing is I have already, gone through the structuring of the provisions. So now we also have two very intelligent and sharp panelists with us. So first of all, Vishalji, what do you think? Is it mandatory after looking at the entire structuring of the sections and provisions and rules? Do you still feel it's mandatory or not?
See, going by the scheme of the GST law and the intent with which the law has been crafted, I believe cross-charge provisions do exist. But the problem is identifying what activities exactly fall in that entry number 2, Schedule 1. The problem is, as all of us are today facing, that majority, all the departments are assuming that whenever there is a head office and a branch, there is by default some activity, rather to put it specifically, some service happening between a head office and branch, whereby the parental function of the head office, whereby the head office is taking care of, I'm using purposefully very raw words, taking care of the branches, managing the branches. The department is contending that there is some sort of flow of service by the head office to the branch. This is where I feel the understanding of that entry is going wrong, according to my understanding of the subject. Interestingly, here I would like to point out the important red decision in JSW Steels, where the Honorable High Court had pointed out that whenever you have to charge, there has to be an existence of service. In other words, there has to be an existence of supply. Now, the question is that when a head office is merely looking, or I will say overlooking the activities of the branch, do there really exist a service? And do there really exist supply? See, for there being supply, what is very important is that there should be some of the activity in the sense there should be sale, barter, transfer, etc., of goods or service or both, and then for a consideration, etc. Now we have to look at each of the elements individually. Firstly, is there a transaction happening between a head office or the branch in the color of sale, barter, etc.? And second, whether that transaction is a service. Both things should happen. So there has to be some sort of, I will say, active flow of service from the head office to the branch. Merely as a parental function, if head office is doing something, I understand that there is no cross charge, though otherwise cross charge as a concept exists in GST. This is my understanding on the subject.
Okay. Avinash ji, your view on this? Is it mandatory or not for everyone?
I think first Pramod is with us. He should add his views. Then I'll certainly share.
Sure.
Pramod ji.
Thank you. So I think what I have read through or gone through the concepts, there is no cross charge as a concept that is defined under GST. We don't find cross charge as a word which is there in GST, wherein it is mandatory that a distinct person has to put a supply invoice on the other distinct person, and it has to be named as a cross charge. There are two concepts that find its existence under GSTs are, I guess, input service distributor mechanism, wherein if one distinct person is incurring some expenses on behalf of certain other distinct person and taking the input services, then that distinct person has to pass on that input credit to the other distinct person, and that happens via input service distribution mechanism, which is called ISD mechanism. And then the circular 199 that you spoke about is bringing another concept of internally generated invoices, wherein if what Vishalji spoke about is if one branch of the same company is providing some services specifically, then those should be charged to another distinct person via internally generated invoices, and that is taxable, which is what the circular 199 clarifies. And all these cross-charge concepts started surfacing after the Columbia Asia judgment by the Advanced Ruling Authority, which was upheld by the Appellate Advanced Ruling Authority as well. So I think all the authorities of GST is taking that cognizance from the advanced ruling of Columbia Asia specifically, wherein they are issuing notices to all the corporates who has head office or have incurred expenses in their head office or one of the branches, and they are saying that these incurrence of expenses are considered as supply to their other branches, and accordingly those head office should be liable to cross charge. I think we have many instances, and few of the occasions we are also challenging those in high courts where merely just incurring the expenses by the head office for the head office cannot be termed as a supply from head office to the other branches, and hence cross charge should not be levied, whereas the authorities are saying there is a service involved. So I think that's my submission.
So after hearing all the experts, what I can say, my perception is slightly different. See, nothing can be taxed under GST unless there is a supply. It may be supply of goods, or it may be supply of services, or it may be both. That is a blend of both. If it is a goods, then the law is very clear. Rule 28 as referred by Shefali ji is very clear. Because there is actual transmission of goods from one place to another, and therefore there is a supply. And there is no concept of inter-branch transfer under GST. There is a concept of a distinct person, and therefore the leviability will arise. Then the argument was on what amount the leviability has to be. Therefore, Rule 28, it says that if it is a related person, then even if an invoice of 1 rupee will be suffice, provided they are having the capacity to claim the entire input tax credit. Now, that is also disputed, input tax credit as a whole or input tax credit on that particular invoice. That we are not going into today. But in goods, when it is said that one branch or one HO supplying to another branch or a branch supplying to HO or vice versa, whatever, we can visualize that, we can see that it's a tangible transmission and therefore taxable. So the sum and substance would be, unless there is a supply, either by HO to a branch or by a branch to HO or by one branch to another branch, there cannot be any taxability. And so far as the common expenses, because now the question will arise, what about the common expenses? So far as common expenses are concerned, there is a concept of input service distributor. That if there arises any common expenses, wherein multiple branches or multiple organizations of one branch or distinct persons are involved, it has to be categorically and now mandatorily after 1st April 2025, it is mandatory required to be distributed. So that question also will not arise. Now coming back to cross charge, I personally feel that any deeming provision or any presumption has no scope or no space under tax law, unless it is expressly specified in the statute. And I cannot locate any particular provision which says that even if there is no supply of any service, the cross charge will be there. Meaning thereby, if a head office is there which is taking care of the overall growth of the organization and meeting certain expenses for that, which are not common expenses, which are for maintaining that head office or a particular branch, then you cannot say that since this, let's say, a person is sitting in head office at Delhi, his salaries are there debited, and he is providing services, or rather he is managing the IT services, let's say, for the entire company of 28 states they are registered. It cannot be said that there has to be a requirement of a cross charge. Even 199 circular also says that to an extent, but the department does not appreciate, and therefore they are still following that Columbia Asia. And they are saying नहीं employee अगर है, employee के अगर 5 दिन गए तो आपको 5 दिन का सैलरी आपको बिलिंग करना पड़ेगा. That is what they are saying. Nevertheless, no problem. But can we give any other example wherein without making a supply, express supply, there can be a, I would say, sharing of the benefits with any other branch. It can be a common expense, for that ISD is there. It can be a specific supply of service, like HO is providing any specific service to the branch. Then the requirement as per Rule 28 is there. It is a supply of service. But otherwise than this, merely if any expenditures are incurred by the HO, or if there is a research and development wing, or if there is any common, let's say a common place wherein we are taking the benefit or we are giving the benefit to all the 28 registrations, and there is no supply, it is merely for the growth or planning or many strategizing or any other purpose, I am of the view there cannot be a levy of tax because there is no supply. Unless there is a supply. So the sum and substance and the result or final conclusion can be, as per me, as per my limited understanding, would be, unless there is a supply which is predominantly seen in the transaction, there cannot be any levy of tax. It applies both to goods as well as to services. And henceforth, as per me, there is no concept of cross charge. There is a concept of supply within branches, supply from HO to branch, or supply from branch to HO. And there is no concept as said to be a cross charge wherein we have to bill. Unless there is a supply, there is no requirement of any invoicing. There is no requirement of any discharge of tax. This is what I understand. And therefore, answer to Shefali's question, it is not mandatory.
So this was very important. I will say very important and very firm assertion made by Avinash ji that there is no requirement of cross charge. There can only be supply. Unless and until there is a supply, you don't need to cross charge, right? Now, there is one very important thing, is Vishal ji also said, that there should be a supply. Just because I'm procuring some services which may be directly or indirectly relevant to the other branches also, because let us say, for example, a corporate, to run a corporate, we need to do some statutory compliances, right? So they are not directly relevant to my sales or marketing offices or my different branches at the different states. So they are not directly relevant, but to run that entire company as a company, they are required. First thing. Second thing is, now I am consuming some of the supply. So for ISD and cross charge, one thing I would like to make it clear, because this is a general confusion with many people, that when you are procuring something and it is delivered at some other branch, then you need to go through ISD. But when we are consuming it, so as a branch, as a head office or research or marketing, like whatever office you are, if you're consuming something yourself and doing some task, it may or may not be a supply, that's a different issue. Let us park it here. But if you're consuming something, it will not be an ISD. So first of all, let us remove this ISD because it's very little scope. Now I'm consuming something and I'm doing something, right? Now my another question to both of you is, all three of you is, that what will be the determinative factor? So if I'm a head office and I'm doing the compliance, now my branches, they are not required to do that compliance directly, but to, as a company, to run, to survive, it's important for us to do those particular compliances. But if I'm talking about a research center, so research center is not doing something which is mandatory for the survival of company. It may or may be helpful in the future. Let us say I'm doing some kind of research on a product, so there may be some outcome, there may not be any outcome in the future. So like, what will be the determinative factor, that if I am consuming something and then I'm doing some activities, then actually I'm doing some supply to my other branches or not? How we will determine it? Because in case of independent parties, it's easy, because there must be some agreement or there will be invoicing. So we'll be able to, get to know from those things. But because now it is internal issue of the company, so what will be those factors through which we can say that in this particular case there is actually a supply, and in those kind of scenarios there is no supply? So I will start with Vishalji.
Ma'am, I'll put it very simply. So let us say generally it happens in case of our own CA firms or legal firms where we have multiple branches, like in our case also. Let us say a work has come to my Mumbai branch, but I need support of your branch, which is a Delhi branch. So I will expressly reach out to you seeking your support, saying that Shefali ji, this particular matter is of your expertise domain. So I want your involvement, I want your backup support, and you help me out in this particular execution by providing your office support or your branch support to my branch support to my branch. In this particular case, there is an express flow of service. So if you're asking me how I can distinguish out, my answer would be very simple, which I mentioned in the previous deliberation also, that there has to be an express performance of some service. Like I am asking you to get some part of my particular activity done. Either we are doing it jointly or I completely outsource it to you and get it done from your office. Then only there will be cross charge. This is what is my interpretation of that particular entry too. Simply because there is an incurrence of expenses, like you took very important, very crucial example of R&D, because today in majority sectors, which may include your pharmaceuticals, which may include even your car manufacturing, today R&D is gaining a lot of importance, and there is a big substantial proportion of the expense on these things, even in IT sectors. In that particular case, obviously only one of the, maybe the head office is the one who is incurring that particular expense. Can we say that when the head office is incurring the expense, it is also providing the R&D to all the branches? I don't think so. This is what is very important. See, even in our day-to-day language, what will you say? That the head office has incurred this cost. It may have been, it may be benefiting all the branches definitely, because whatever R&D we are doing, or let us say we are doing some corporate level marketing, that is benefiting all the branches. But then whether that is sufficient, that since all are getting the benefit, that there should be cross charge, I believe no. So I understand there has to be an express flow of some activity, flow of some service. This is my understanding.
Okay, Pramodji, would you like to add
Yeah,
something on it?
just to add to what Vishal bhai said is specifically in the R&D where the company or any branch specifically is incurring R&D expenses. First of all, those will be capitalized as per, of course, the policy of that corporate, and benefit of those research and development will incur in future if those product gets finally out for the production and for the sales. At that time, company will also amortize those, capitalized expenses. So, as Vishal bhai said, currently when the R&D center is incurring those expenses, there is no supply. So, hence there is no requirement of cross charge by that branch. That is my input on that.
So, Vinashji, your views, like when we can say that in a definitive way that there is a supply, and in which cases we can say there was actually no supply from our branch.
You want me to speak?
Yes, I think now I over to Vishal. Avinash.
Yeah, I've already said, and I concur with Vishal bhai. Unless there is a supply, there cannot be any tax. So first we need to establish. Now, so far as the query which pertains to the consumption of a particular service for the benefit of the entire organization is concerned, still there cannot be any supply and therefore no tax. The benefit will flow to the organization maybe after 1 year, maybe after immediate next day, maybe after 10 years. But when the benefit will flow, there will be an outward supply on which the tax will be levied and paid. Question arises that this R&D and the expenditure borne on that R&D, even if it is being done by the organization or a particular registered GST or a distinct entity, even if the credit is taken because it is registered, even if the input tax credit is taken, the question of outward supply or the condition of outward supply must be satisfied. Unless that is satisfied, neither, see, the answer would be, to be very short and precise, the answer would be merely because I have incurred 100 crore rupees, there is a input tax credit of 18 crore rupees. I'm not supposed to raise an invoice to all my distinct persons or to all the registrations saying that this is what I am cross charging and therefore I'm utilizing the input tax credit and passing on the credit to them. Because then the question would arise, unless there is a supply, there cannot be passing of the credit and therefore 16(2) will get violated. Therefore, it has to be corroborated, it has to be linked with a particular supply, then only the leviability will arise. I hope I'm clear. This is what I personally perceive, and therefore I time and again say there is no concept of cross charge as such. Rule 28 is very clear. Whenever there is a supply transaction between a related person, you can go for valuation as per Rule 28.
So I think it's very clear to everyone when Unajji is saying that according to him there is no concept of cross charge in GST, not saying that there cannot be the supplies to the distinct person or the distinct branches. But what he is trying to say that if there is a supply to a distinct person, you are simply raising an invoice, right? It's a supply, and for supply we have simple invoices. And if there is no supply, if something is actually not falling under the ambit of supply, then you can also not cross charge it. I think I understood it correctly, right? So it is his views about the cross charge. So for the many corporates, they face the challenge that what kind of services they are required to uh, transmit to the other branches and what kind of services they are not. Now another I will say I'm repeating this thing, but sometimes like in most of the webinars and in most of the places, what I have seen when the corporate office is doing something mandatory, like something is statutorily required, the people said that no, you will have to cross charge it. because it is required for the survival of all of the branches, even if they are not doing it, even if they are not asking for it, even if they don't need it according to them. Because the sales office may not be needing any, compliance services. They are not directly connected to the compliance. So I have seen that this is a misconception at most of the places, that people send if something is strictly required and any of the office is doing that, then in that case you will have to cross charge it mandatorily. You will have to allocate it to every office, who is concerned with you. So I think this point is very much very clearly made clear by the Avinash that if actually there is a supply, and for the supply it should be flowing from you to that other person. They must be even asking for it, or it should be clear into your the structure, like how you have created the relationship with the other branches. But I would like to make add one more thing here, that as a corporate, because sometimes your complex structure is the reason for so many notices, because many things are not clear, your branches are not clear about the relationship per se. So in that case, it's very important for us that when we are actually supplying something, the contracts between the different branches and how they will be procuring the services of head office or any research center or anything, that process, that SOP should be very, very clear what kind of documents you will be using, so that we can easily segregate that, okay, if there is this particular document, like this document was raised by the branch, or like whatever office, like sales office or marketing office, so they must be raising a requirement. So if they are raising a requirement, it means they asked for it, so there was actually a supply. And if they are not asking for it, then irrespective of what I am doing, consuming the services, doing some tasks, sitting in my office at head office or whatever office, maybe the research office, but I'm not supplying anything because that's not my intention. I'm not intended to supply anything to any of my branch. So I think this was very much clear about the cross charge. Now, I think some people have raised their hands for asking the question. So, Sameer Kapadia, can I unmute him?
Yes, ma'am, you can. You are co-host.
I have the option of ask to unmute. Yes, Samirji.
I just wanted to add one example on the cross-charge part of it. You did touch upon it just a few minutes ago. When you're talking about whether or not service is provided, and you said that a statutory compliance. So we are looking at it in a very, very plain vanilla way when we look at the kind of services which are offered. But if you take a entity with multi-state presence, generally, at least under GST, you would have seen that the GST compliance process has been centralized. Similarly, if you go to see, there might be a legal function which might be centralized, and then you might have one person traveling across for matters across and different states and handling it. The centralized tax team is handling all the GST compliances. To a certain extent, yes, this is a service which is being offered. That is one view that I would like to present. Another thing also, apart from just statutory compliances, you could have other services. If you take banks, you might have a centralized unit which might be doing, customer registration and opening up accounts and that kind of thing. You might have one single location which might be, printing checkbooks and sending it across to different locations. You have one location which might be doing data management and so on and so forth. These are very, very specialized services. And if you ask me, my very, very simplistic view is that when you talk about cross charge, actually, this has come from a slightly different concept of cost sharing rather than anything else. Uh, and this cost sharing also has come into place because ultimately the idea was that if there is a consumption which is taking place, then the destination state should get some revenue out of it. It is only from that perspective. So these were my 2 or 3 thoughts on that. You may please consider, and if you think it is valuable, possibly give your views on that. Thank you so much.
100% valuable. 100% valuable. I just want to add one thing. See, this concept of cost sharing or cross charge is not a new concept. Practically, in service tax era also, there used to be a service which was said to be business support services. So whenever an organization or a business is supporting the another business within the same entity, a service tax was also used to be charged for that, known as business support service. And it was so broadly worded that anything and everything could fall into it. But here the question is whether it is mandatory or not, whether there is any provision in the statute or not. You gave an example of the centralized compliance. So in centralized compliance, let's say if I am having a employee who is complying for the entire organization, having, let's say, multiple registration across the country, even if that is the case, I am of the view that the cross charge may not be required. Reason being that there is a relationship of employment, an employer and employee relationship. Schedule 3 comes into play, and therefore that is the employee of the organization. He is not employee of a particular head office. He is an employee of the organization providing service, and the contract of employment is entered into by an organization. So that is my view. Second, when it comes to the another issue which you have touched upon, banking and all. So if a bank is procuring any service from, let's say, inward, and then those services are being handed over, for example, printing of stationeries. So obviously, if this stationery is being printed with a bank name and a branch name, it will go to that branch, and the respective invoice has to be raised, or the cost sharing has to be done. But when it comes to a service, because we are talking about cross charge, which predominantly is all about service. So when it comes to a service, is it that a bank takes a common service and then it is distributed amongst the rest of the branches? I don't find any example of that, as per my limited understanding. So maybe I also need to check. But when it comes to service, when it comes to goods, things are very clear. But when it comes to service, things are still hazy, and times will tell, because there are multiple courts which are dealing with this concept of cross charge. Even we are also arguing in a couple of the courts. We have also challenged wherein the cross charge is levied merely for an expenditure by an HO, or all the debits of the HO are said to be distributed to 28 locations. So the department will have to appreciate the concept, because department is the tax administration wing. They have to administer the entire taxability. Merely because one advanced ruling authority has said, merely because someone has said that no, agar aapka employee sharing aapne kiya hai, to you'll have to raise an invoice. That doesn't mean that it becomes a law. Law is very clear, and I personally believe that as a student of law, I need to stick with the law. And law is very simple. As Vishalji also said, Shifali ma'am and Pramodji also said, law is very simple. If there is a supply, if it falls within the scope of supply as per section 7, maybe under section 7(1)(c, as a related person read with schedule 1, it has to be taxed. But the moment it will be read with schedule 3, it will go out of tax net, and that will be squarely applied to employer and employee relationship. This is what I can add to what you have submitted. But yes, very prompt and valuable examples that you have given. Thank you so much.
So now all of you can post your questions. After that, Vishalji and Avinashji and Pramodji, the last final question is from my side. So see, there are provisions, but there is also a lot of confusion to the department. And as Vishalji said, that there were many notices to the different corporates for this cross charge issue. So like, what should be our course of action? Because generally, we at this time when we are talking about like when something wrong is not already done. So today, if you are talking about like what should be the course of action like any complex corporate should be doing, considering the different kind of supplies. So there are some clear services, clear supplies. There may be some tasks they are doing, or there may be like some expenditure they are consuming at some kind of office. Like what should be their course of action so that they can prevent a lot of litigation into this particular area.
I'll share one simple point that firstly, everybody, whether we as tax advisors or the corporates, we have to be first clear about that whether we are disputing the levy, or are we disputing the valuation, or are we disputing the procedural nitty-gritties in the notice or the action taken by the department. Many times I feel that we wish not to pay tax, but we are more challenging the other aspects in the notice. So I think we have to be first clear with this, that whether we are agreeing to the notice so far as the levy part is concerned. Now, if you ask me that what should be our course of action, then I think it would be simple, that where we are challenging the levy, that is, we believe that the activities or the expenses that the HO has incurred do not fit in the cross charge because there is no express supply, I believe RIT is the best forum to address that particular point. However, where we are talking about the procedural aspect, maybe the valuation aspect, and we have accepted the levy, then I think going ahead in appeal and corroborating these valuation part, like what Avinash Bhaiya was trying to say, the circular says that whenever ITC is fully eligible, even 1 rupee invoice will be an accepted invoice. So the question is whether it is ITC qua that particular activity or ITC of that entire unit. All these points maybe you can take up in appeal where it is about the interpretation of the law. So we have to be very clear as to what we are exactly disputing in that particular matter. This is my submission on this point.
Pramodji?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Vishal Bhai also. And I think again the same moot question is whether there is a supply or not. That first needs to be established. And if we are challenging the levy, then our reply has to incorporate that fact and ensure that we cover it in our replies. And department response to the department also needs to be included in that. And most of the services, as we discussed, between an HO or where the HO is incurring expenses, there is no supply component, and hence we should be ready to challenge the levy itself, rather than just uh, listening to what department wants and following their direction and getting into the loop, and ultimately we end up paying later on, maybe asked to pay interest and penalty on the same as well. That's all.
Avinash, do you want to add something on it? Avinash is here?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
See, when it comes to any such issue of the litigation or maybe show cause or how to handle that, what I would suggest, because this is a long drawn exercise, it is not going to settle in a year or so. So the large corporates who have the complex structures must dispute. I'm not saying they should not dispute, but at the same time, they should also pay.
Right,
What they
right.
can do is they can pay under protest. They can avail because their respective branches can avail the credit. There is no question about it. If there is a livability, and it means that you are presuming that there is a supply. And if there is supply, then credit cannot be questioned. So they can avail the credit. But my suggestion would be there can be two things. One, they can pay under protest. The other branch can take credit. It depends on the funds and the working capital and the amount involved. They can utilize the credit or they may not utilize the credit. Because if they utilize the credit and tomorrow, if something happens wherein the levy goes, and then the department says you have availed the credit of something which was not available to you and therefore pay the entire amount or reverse the entire amount along with interest and penalty, the problem will still sustain. So therefore, either pay under protest, avail the credit but not utilize it, and then challenge the levy. Because what will happen if you are a large organization, there is a liability of let's say 100 crores per year, and this issue gets settled after 10 years. So there will be a liability of 1,000 crores along with interest and penalty. So that will hit very heavily to the balance sheet, to the P&L. So my recommendation and suggestion would be, since this is something which is, see, one thing is you may pay and take credit, do not raise any dispute. Dispute when a corporate will raise, when they have not paid and there is a show cause asking for interest and penalty on 200 crores, 500 crores or a larger amount. At that point only, the people will face the heat. Otherwise, majority of the organizations have accepted this. They have the view that कौन dispute करेगा, कौन litigation में जाएगा, pay कर दो, सामने credit मिल रहा है, credit ले लो. The issue will arise when they will dispute, when the department will come and dispute the valuation, as Vishal Bhai said. So therefore, even if you pay, I am recommending, even if you pay, as per my limited understanding, you pay under protest. because this issue is sub judice. So therefore you pay under protest. So tomorrow, if something happens in your favor, you will be eligible to claim refund thereof. If nothing happens, then at least the interest penalty burden will not be there. If there is a dispute of valuation, then also since you have disputed, you have all the rights to go to the courts. So that would be my advice, that inspire, because this is a long drawn exercise. This is not going to settle in a year or so. Majority of the corporates, large corporates, are facing this heat, and therefore they can take a risk, but a calculated risk. Going to a writ court is certainly a suggestion, but getting a favorable order from the writ court and getting it settled and vetted from the Honorable Apex Court will take its own time. And by that time, if lawmakers come out with a provision of cross charge retrospectively as they have done in 7(1) AA, then just imagine what will happen. So it is better to pay under protest and avoid the interest and penalty.
So I think these are very, very, very important points which are elaborated by all of the panelists. I would just summarize all of them. First thing is, as Avinashji, Vishalji, and Pramodji have said, and which I have seen is a confusion amongst the people, is that you are not required to cross-charge in each and every situation. There is also a question related to this point, so I'm clarifying it again. So first of all, ISD is very limited thing. The thing is, you are receiving the invoice and your distinct person is receiving the services at their end. Only in that case you are required to. So only in that case you are required to go for ISD, which is mandatory now, right? Other than this very small area, no ISD is required, right? If it's not service, and if you are not receiving the invoice and some other branch is not receiving the services, if you are receiving it and you are consuming it, even if it's a service, right? You received and you consumed. Whether you provided some services to or supply to your other branches or not, it's a different issue. But you consumed it yourself, it will not be ISD. Now, whether it will be cross-charged or not, let us divide it into again two parts. Second, the first thing is if it's a normal supply. So I consumed a service or goods and I supplied something to my other branches, then there will be normal invoice because it's a supply. If there is no supply, right, in that particular case, there will not be any cross-charge also. That is the view of our esteemed panel. So we require to see if some supply is actually provided by us or not. On the other hand, general misconception is that supplies will be implied. What I have understood from all of the webinars I have attended till now, that it will be implied that if you are consuming some expensive and you are doing a task which is also beneficial directly or indirectly to other distinct person, it means there is an implied supply and you will have to take it into care by doing a cross charge thing. So this is very important point which is being clarified in this webinar by our panelists, that in that case also you're required to see if you are actually supplying something to a distinct persons or not. If you're not supplying, there is no required for ISD or cross charge or invoicing. Any three of them is not required. Then another very important thing is, because we all understand that provisions are complex and sometimes it takes a lot of year to settle on a disputed situation. So there are very, very good suggestions from our panelists for the current situation, like what we can do at this point of time so that we can protect us in the future. So first thing is, as a corporate, if you can actually transmit it to the other branches, this is what generally corporates do, what I believe. Generally what they do, they think that okay, there is no loss in shifting some of the amount to the other branches. They see the ratio of sales purchase of all of the branches, and if there is no apparent loss to them either of money or working capital, what they will do, they will say that okay, it's okay, we will just shift it to other branch. But I think very important point here added by Avinash ji is that even if you are shifting that tax to them in the future, if it comes that it was actually not a supply, so whatever you shifted was actually not a tax, so the input tax credit which is claimed by the branches, so you think that you are playing it safe, you just raised the invoice, they have taken the input tax credit, so it is the safest thing to do. But I think this is also very important clarification which he has given, that if there is no supply, so in future the department can say that there was no supply, so now you are required to reverse this input tax credit also, because there cannot be an input tax credit of something which is not a tax. So these are the important points. Now I would like to take up some of the questions. So the first question is from Satish Kasliwalji, and he said that GST audit conducted under Section 65 liability of cross charge arises for financial year 2021. Now we are paying the GST tax in 24-25. Is interest will be attracted, and can we claim ITC in 2024-25? Who would like to answer? Vishalji, would you like to answer it?
So two questions. First, whether there would be interest liability, I believe yes. If you are accepting the levy, I don't think
Yes.
you can skip the interest because interest comes along with the tax. Now, the interesting question, the second part of the question is that can you take ITC? Now, here there is an interesting point. My reverse question would be now, technically this particular question or this particular supply was of 2021. When for some reason you did not pay the tax, it means you also did not raise the invoice. So whether will you be raising an invoice now first for complying with the law? And if you are raising the invoice now, will you be considering the current date or can you go back and take the date of 2021? Obviously not. So whether either you will not comply with the invoicing part. If you are not complying with the invoicing part, there is no question of taking credit because the basic document is missing. But interestingly, if you decide to pay it now and even raise invoice, I'm sure no system will allow you to go back to raise invoice of 2021. So you'll be raising invoice of 24-25. Then the question will come, if the invoice is of 24-25, reading the language of 16.4, it is not referring to supply belonging to a period. It is referring to document or invoice belonging to a period. So can now I say that basis the invoice which I have raised in 24-25, I will be eligible to take ITC. So that is an interesting point to explore, that if I am ready to pay now, can I raise the invoice now? So if the answer to this is positive, then I'm sure 16.4 you can manage. Yes.
Avinash, do you want to add something into it?
No, I'll 100% concur with Vishal Bhai, and certainly there are provisions pertaining to invoicing also, and there are provisions pertaining to time of supply also. And I personally believe that nothing is beyond law, and Section 31 is very clear that in case of provision of services within a particular time limit, that is 45 days or 30 days, the invoice must be generated, and time of supply will begin. So therefore, I am of the view that the invoice cannot be generated today. And since the invoice cannot be generated today, we'll have to go back and generate an invoice. Then the question of 16.4 need not arise.
Right. So let's take the next question. I hope, Sateshji, this answer your question very well. So audit fees borne by the head office of a company. The company has a branch in another state. Whether it would fall under ISD or cross charge. I think it's already answered by us. Second proviso, someone has just copied the second proviso, eligible for full input tax credit. Perspective to section 17.1, 17.2 or 17.5 as per dealer or per transaction subject to section 17.1 and 17.2. Avinash, you want to
I've
say
already
something?
stated this is not the right forum to discuss this because it will take the entire session. But
Right.
certainly this is whether we have to go the SSE wise or the transaction wise.
Okay. Shashi Kumar PNG. Hello, sir. Sorry, I missed the initial discussion. Wanted to understand what do you mean by there should be a supply to cross charge. Example, software license and a server expense incurred in head office and used by other 4 branches in different states, and say 3 branches are having outward supply and the 1 branch does not have any outward supply. In this case, for 3 branches, cross charge to be done. Any
I
of
think
the
it's
branches?
ISD. I think it is clearly ISD. When the other branches are consuming the software, I don't think there is any challenge in treating this as ISD. Definitely, it is not cross charge. If we have to answer from that perspective.
So we already clarified it, Shashi Kumarji. If services invoice is received by some other branch and they are actually consumed by some other branch, it will be a fit case of ISD. And when there is ISD, there is no question for cross charge. How to pay under protest if it to pay through 3B? If it is paid in GST or DRC3, every time there will be ITC issue for the claimant branch. Should there be any invoice for X charge if provision of ISD and X charge were not compulsory up to March 25? X charge. is
Next
fraud
charge
of
is cross charge. That is cross.
Okay. So, Avinash, is there a specific way in GST through which we can ensure that we are paying under protest, or we can communicate to the department?
Even I think in 3B nothing can be done, but yes, we can very well submit a letter immediately
Mhm.
after filing the 3B that this is the amount which has been calculated on the basis of this, and it has been discharged under protest. That can be more than sufficient and placed on record. It can be shared via email also to the jurisdictional commissioner and the jurisdictional officer. That would be more than sufficient.
So I think that's an important question. Like, it's a common question. Many people have this question. Like many times we say pay under protest, but how to pay under protest? There is no mechanism in GST portal, so you can simply write a letter or send an email. If there is no implied supply between head office and branch, that means there is no internally generated services, and therefore there is no cross charge. So to that extent, Circular 199 will not be applicable.
Correct.
Hope this view is correct.
Yes.
So this is what we all are discussing and concluding in this particular session. So after that, there is no further question.
Time is also over.
Time is also over. So I think it was a wonderful session, and it was the third session of our April month, which we are conducting on every Friday. So the day and timing is same for each and every session, so that there is no confusion amongst the participants, and they can book their timing in advance. So every Friday, 4 to 5, we have these particular sessions where all of our panelists from the Ashwa, we come and we discuss the different issues, and we try to discuss it in a very layman's language and in a very simplified manner, and in practicality, not with the theoretical. So we don't go with the sections and all, but we try to discuss it like general people. And I hope all of these sessions must be useful for you. If you've not got our calendar, you can just get in touch with us, and you will be able to get our calendar in advance, like for the each and every month. So the next session for the April month will be on the next Friday at the same time, 4 to 5. And with this, I would like to thank all of our listeners and all of the people in our panelists, Vishalji, Pramodji, and especially Avinashji, like being so much occupied in his court proceedings. He always took time to enlighten us with his knowledge and wisdom. So, with all of these words, I would like to conclude this session. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you very much, Shefali ji. Thank you.